Good morning to all reviewers and friends. Today I'm presenting my AIAD projects throughout the semester. Without further ado, let's get started. Starting off with the first project, site analysis, and just a brief introduction to the project. We were given a freedom to choose topic of our interest, a theme and a site. Ultimately, I've chosen street photography as my topic because simply it's one of my hobby. I love to go around town and take photos of random strangers on the street and really just capture random moments. And these moments can sometimes turn out very pure and meaningful in a very imperfect way. And that's what I like about it. And as for theme, I went with liminality. I felt like liminality and photography has a great connection. I was thinking that photographs are in a sense a threshold between reality and illusions. And that's basically what liminality is, a state of transition between two worlds. As for site, I went with a very interesting site, which is Central Depot. So just a brief introduction to the site. Central Depot was built back in 1905 as a railway workshop and a storage. It was once the biggest and finest engineering workshop in the world. However, it was targeted by the British back in 1945 during World War II. It was bombed by multiple B-29 aircraft, and ever since, it hasn't been fully recovered. Some part of the site was rebuilt, but most of it was left as ruins. Anyways, so looking at the site analysis I've done here, for my first board, I was trying to analyze the architectural elements of the site, the white and red bricks, the steel structures, the steel roofs, and also the concrete. So the way I present it is with a little element of time, because I think the cool thing about the site is that it was almost destroyed back in 100 years ago. And the idea of it used to being a place that fixes things but it hasn't managed to fix itself. The idea of it being stuck in time and the sense of liminality. I just love the concept of it and have implemented into the board. So moving on, this is a simple mapping of the site, the city of Santo, the site itself, the highways, the LRT lines, and the other large cities around the site itself. So it's a presentation of all the information above in a more abstract way. Well, the funny thing is that I've actually never visited the site myself. So what I did here was actually trying to imagine what the site would look like back in the days and also now. So you can see here the way I imagine it is the site looks very incompleted and in a very chaos way. So you can see the very incompleted structures, the steel roof, the train station over here, and a little time machine over here, which is an implementation of the time. And I've took it one step further to look into the activities back in the days in the site. So during World War II, the Japanese soldiers, the English soldiers, the mechanic fixing the trains, and the guards standing around guarding the place, and also the idea of fixing the time machine, which is a fixing time instead of fixing the place itself, was a very cool concept. And in the background is actually a atomic bombing map showing the targeted areas in Malaysia back in 1945, the aircraft traffic, the blast radius, the safety zone away from the blast radius, and also the dates where it was bombed. So this concludes the first project of site analysis. So the second part of the project, which is programming, trying to figure out what the entire project would be about. So I've actually decided to make the project about educating people about the hidden history and the meaning of the site, which a lot of people do not know about, and truly appreciate the beauty of the site through photographic principles. So the idea of the project is that people can interact with the space and take photos to learn about the site and a few things about photography. So once you have entered the facility, you can collect a disposable camera and take photos throughout the space. And after that, the sequence of space goes as follows: illumination tunnel, or ordinary space, radiance echo, light description, optical haptic, moments encapsulation, composition of past, and finally Hall of Wonderments. And I will further explain each spaces over here. So these spaces are actually designed to create a gradient of knowledge about photography and the site history. And starting with light, the very important elements of photography. So in illumination tunnel is a space that introduces lighting to the public, specifically direct lighting. So people will understand how direct lighting and hard shadows changes how we perceive objects within a space, including themselves emotionally. And afterwards, ordinary space, quite similar to the previous space, but instead introduces diffuse lighting to the public, and how it changes emotions of objects under warm, soft lighting and soft shadows. After that is radiance echo, Once again, it's about lighting, but this time it's about the distance of reflected lighting. So people can interact with mirrors in the space to change the distance to understand how the distance of light affect the light on the object. And that will conclude all the spaces about light. The next few spaces will be about framing, starting off with light description. So the idea of the space is to use the concept of very first camera, which is camera obscura, to capture scenes from the outside and project them into a dark interior space. So the camera obscura are actually used to frame activities and behaviors outside and around the site without having to intervene with the scene. So as you can see here, the camera obscura captures view from outside and it can be rotated and project into a screen in the interior. Next is the optical haptic. It's a space for users to interact with micro and macro lenses and observe objects and textures in other spaces, for example, ordinary space, and understand their qualities of objects and textures in a macro and microscopic scale. Afterwards will be the composition of paths. The space is designed to frame certain views that contains hidden historical meanings around the site and also observe objects from other spaces at a normal scale. And the last space for framing, which is moments encapsulation. However, this time is about framing of human activities from other spaces. Periscope will be placed all around the space so people can interact and capture random moments happening in other spaces like ordinary space or illumination tunnel. And finally, the Hall of Vehemence, the final space in the sequence, where people get to review and share the photographs they have captured throughout the space, or the pictures of them captured by strangers, unveiling and understand the emotions and stories of each photos. So in summary, the project is to allow people to understand the emotions and historical stories of the site through photographic principles. So in my next project, I have chosen ordinary space to further elaborate on this specific space. The reason I've chosen this space is because of the importance of it. Seeing as a space that introduces the very essence of photography, which is light, it also includes the element of framing and time. It sort of includes everything that the programs offer. And just to recap, ordinary space is an area for people to understand the effect of diffuse lighting and soft shadow has on emotions and mood on objects. Besides that, it's also an interactive space for the public to learn about the history of the site. So ordinary space actually breaks down into 4 elements: shadow, light, framing, and time. And shadows actually break down into 4 categories as well. First one being the shadow of hidden meaning. On top of ordinary space, there's a dome. It is designed and placed in such a way that the sunlight will project onto the atomic bomb on the 18th of February every year, casting a shadow onto the floor in the center of ordinary space, signifying the bombing of the site back in 18th February 1945. Secondly is a shadow of history. During a specific time, the shadow of certain historical ruined pieces would cast shadow onto the wall, creating a shadow of history. Lastly is a shadow of intimacy and emotions. In ordinary space, there's sitting place that will capture people's shadows and revealing their intimacy and emotions during specific time. First one being the light collector. So the light collector is a piece of technology that collects sunlight from all directions and projects it into the interior space through a tube of aluminium. And the way these light collectors are positioned and placed in ordinary space is that the objects within the space will receive lighting no matter the time of the day. Another method is the light reflector. This is actually a similar technique used in Kimbell Museum. So the wall would have an opening which allows sunlight to enter and the reflector will be placed right below it. So the way the reflector works is that it will reflect sunlight from all directions onto the wall and back to the reflector and to the wall again. Therefore, the geometry of the wall and the reflector works together to create a well-distributed lighting around it. And lastly will be the light box. The light box simply helps to project sunlight through large windows into the interior space. And the Japanese washi paper will be used to cover all windows. The sunlight coming through the washi paper will help to diffuse it and at the same time provide a sense of warmth and calmness. The next element will be framing of history, behaviors and activities. So there are periscopes placed around the space which will allow people from spaces such as moment encapsulation and composition of paths to observe from a distance. and this way implying photographic theory of non-intervention theory. And last but not least, the element of time. There are definitely a certain element of time throughout the space. However, in this case, it is to achieve a hallucinatory and mysteriousness effect on the objects while photographing it. And next up, let's look at a few perspectives that will demonstrate these elements in the form of spaces. In the first one, you can see the overall ambience and the mood of the space that is warm and calm. And the element of shadow of history is being shown here. In the second perspective, you can see the vault itself over here and the objects that are being framed. And next one is the vault itself. The diffuse lighting created by the reflector makes the vault looks like a space that blends right into the corner of our eyes. And the fourth one is the framing of shadows of intimacy. So in this specific perspective, the time of the day will be 10 AM, and during that time you can see that the casting of shadows of intimacy will be cast onto the floor itself. And last but not least, the element of time. So around 11 AM in ordinary space, you can expect to capture a picture like this. A sense of mysteriousness and dreaminess, all because a strong beam of sunlight casting onto it. And now I'm actually going to show a short time-lapse videos that show the sunlight and shadow casting onto ordinary space. So starting off from the morning, you can see that the sunlight coming in is very warm. However, there's no specific casting at this time, around noon, and this is around 6 PM. You see the shadow of history being cast. And in this particular perspective, it will be around 10 AM that you see the strong sunlight coming in, and around 12 PM also that the sunlight will project onto the object. And on that note, my presentation has come to an end. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.